Greetings ladies and gentlefish, and welcome back to World of Tanks. This time we have got some games from subscribers for your viewing pleasure. We are kicking off proceedings with active current in his IS-3A, but before we talk about that, I keep meaning to put some links in the video description, so there should be a link for A, Patreon in case anyone's interested, and B, Discord. And if you want to send me your own replays for me to have a look at and potentially showcase, if you could upload the replay file to What Replays and send me the URL in the appropriate channel on Discord, that just simplifies my life considerably. If I have forgotten to put either of those links in the video description, can someone please poke me? Because baby brain is a thing. So, active in his IS-3A. This is a bit of a weird tank. Now, he's actually platooned up with Plum Guy in the AMX 5100. This thing, the IS-3A, a premium Tier 8 Soviet heavy tank, was introduced into the game some time ago now, if we're going to be honest. But when it was introduced, the A stands for autoloader, but in this instance it was just an automated loading mechanism, so you didn't need a loader, and what you essentially had was an IS-3A with high DPM but poor gun handling, worse than the IS-3, and no loader crew member, which made this thing kind of awkward because it meant that you weren't just able to train your entire crew for insert heavy tank here. However, when people first learned there was an IS-3A with an autoloader turning up to the game, some of them kind of lost their mind and started going on about Russian bias and all that typical stuff. Before many people came to the conclusion that actually they weren't convinced the higher DPM was worth it. The gun handling was atrocious, and you kind of got two schools of thought. One who still thought the IS-3A was pretty good, one who thought the IS-3A was actually a bit pants. And over time, I think the second school of thought seemed to gain popularity, and this tank just never really became that popular. On introduction of the Italian medium tanks with their auto-reloading mechanism, Wargaming decided, let's rework the IS-3A, let's make it more popular by giving it, giving it an auto-reloader. For those who don't know, an auto-reloader is kind of a halfway house between a single shotgun and an autoloader. So instead of loading the magazine all in one go, you load the magazine shell by shell and can fire it shell by shell if you want. The typical trade-off is the further into the magazine you go, the worse your reload becomes. So, it's a pretty straightforward risk-reward kind of mechanic. I say straightforward to understand, not necessarily to implement, but the more damage you try and take now by using the autoloader, the less damage you get in the long term because it cuts into your DPM. That's the idea. So, if you're using it as a single shotgun, generally speaking, it's worse than a comparable single shotgun, and if you're using it as an autoloader, generally speaking, it's worse than a comparable autoloader, but the flexibility to switch between the two is what gives an auto-reloader, generally speaking, its strengths. However, the IS-3A is special. The IS-3A gets an auto-reloader, but instead of the reload time becoming longer the further into the magazine you dip, the reload time becomes shorter the further into the magazine you dip. So instead of this kind of cost-benefit analysis, the playstyle just becomes drive at someone, unload your 3 shots into them, and then giggle because you now actually have a better reload than you would have done otherwise. Oh, that poor Emil. Bernie, Bernie, burn, burn. Which is weird. Go figure. Anyway, this thing isn't for regular sale in the premium shop or anything, by the way. Occasionally rears its little head from time to time, and with Christmas and New Year approaching, I could be wrong, but I wouldn't be surprised to see this in the advent calendar or garbage loot boxes or something like that. Oh, did I just put my own opinion out there? Heaven forfend. Anyway, let's actually have a look at the game. So, completely tier 8 match here on Mountain Pass. Oh, that's a VK. Oh dear. And the scoreline is 7-9. Active's team are already a little bit behind. And now between them, can Active and his platoon mate deal with this VK? We shall see. Essentially, these guys, if they want to win, are probably going to have to carry this quite hard, because the friendly team is... I don't want to say they're not very good, but it definitely, they get outplayed, let's put it that way. They do not do very well. Now, AMX and an IS-3A, that means there are essentially 2 autoloaders going after this poor VK. Active has unloaded 3 shells into the guy, and that was a poor shot for his 3rd shell. And unfortunately, that poor shot kind of costs his platoon mate some health, as the VK puts a shot into him, and that means the LHMTV is able to finish Plum Guy off. That shot, I don't want to be too critical of Active here, because it's a pressurised situation and he does well in this game, but that shot just wasn't very good, that 3rd one in the magazine. Now, if you haven't already noticed, I would pay attention to Active's ammunition situation. He has 15 rounds of ammo left. There are 7 enemy tanks left. This could start becoming a problem. That was also not a very well aimed shot. That shot was clearly aimed toward the front of the prototype, and unfortunately, when you have this kind of ammunition situation, you cannot afford, that was lucky, again, not a particularly well aimed shot, you cannot afford to be snapshotting in this tank the same as you would if you had all your ammunition available. Active has already burned through all his APCR and is down to heat ammunition. Now, another slightly awkward thing is, because this thing is an auto reloader, or an auto loader, you can't mix and match ammunition types within a magazine. So, what that means is that if you want to switch, for example, to high explosive, you're going to have to load an entire mag, or start loading an entire mag of HE. Anyway, 4,000 damage, that's quite an ambitious LHMTV. Yeah, never really going to work out very well for you, was it, mate? But, let's start doing some counting. 11 shells left, 3 of which are high explosive. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bad guys. On average, that's 2 shell per bad guy, which is around 400 hit points. Sorry, 800, I can do maths. T28 prototype, oh, that was lucky. That could have gone very, very poorly. If this were a single shotgun, you could try and load a HE round to finish that guy off, but it's not, so deal with it. 5,000 damage done now. And Active's team are just wilting like roses without water. It's a little bit sad. Can this SU-101 at least do something about the Centurion before he goes down? No, he can't. And Active, unfortunately, now finds himself in a rather unpleasant situation. He's 1 versus 6, and that's another shell that he cannot afford to miss. The shot was not well aimed. And I get that Active may have been going for a little bit more damage, but in my opinion, to carry this game, he could not afford to do that. Now, he has heat loaded because he's out of APCR. He has 270 penetration with this ammo. The only person on the enemy team who should give that sort of penetration any degree of problems maybe is the Somua SM. It's got some slightly quirky angles here or there and does have some frontal armor, but frankly, as long as the shots are not aimed at things like tracks, Active should be looking to go through all the enemy tanks. Except that he only has 5 rounds of heat. This is one of the few tanks on which actually I'm not convinced taking high explosive is a good idea. Because you've got that low ammunition count, and I'm just not sure it's worth it. Stritzfang, that shot does the job. Can he finish the guy off? Yes, he can. Down to 6 shells, 5 enemy tanks left. This is looking like it might be quite painful, but Active does have most of his hit points remaining. Now, if he comes around this corner, there's a very good chance he's going to be finding a Somua T-34 and SU-101. They were all last spotted on the road at the back. There we go. Shot into the SU-101. He sensibly switches his fire to the Somua, but that was a poorly aimed shot again. That's the tracks. Heat does not do well against suspension and other sorts of spaced armour. And, oh dear, this is going to be messy. That shot bounces, and, I mean, there we go. Let's go and have a look at the post-game stats. So, that for Active then was enough for Ace, Tanker, Bruiser, Arsonist, Fighter, Fire for Effect, and a High Caliber Medal. And a good thing he got that High Caliber Medal too, as it was the High Caliber Medal that meant he got the Heroic Resistance. That of course means he gets the essentially XP as if he'd won the game, which meant he got the Ace Tanker. So, hurrah! Yay, that's good. Having said that, that's a pretty painful game, let's be honest. 6,178 damage and 4 kills in a tier 8 machine and not a win, that's going to leave a bit of a sting. And if you look at... 989 base experience, by the way, that's without adding in the additional experience from Heroic Resistance. That's a lot. If we just compare the two teams, it becomes pretty apparent why Active's team lost. With the exception of about the top 3 guys on Active's team, the enemy team just performed better across the board, pretty much. There were only 4 players on Active's team who did more than 1,000 damage. There were only 6 players on the enemy team who did less than 1,000 damage. Just to put that into some sort of perspective. Plum Guy, Active's platoon mate there, 1,805 damage and 3 kills, and bearing in mind he died relatively early on, that's a respectable amount of damage. Hexkey 3 in the Object 252U, 3,000 damage from him, and of course Active, his 6.2k damage and 4 kills. But there we go, swings and roundabouts, it is what it is. 25 shots fired, 22 hits, 17 penetration, so despite my comments on some of the shots that Active took, his marksmanship wasn't too bad. It's just the situation he was in, he really couldn't afford the wasted shots, just did not have the ammunition. Most of the damage, about 2/3 of it, was from close range in an IS-3A. You wouldn't expect him to be doing loads of sniping. 9 hits received, 6 penetrated, 3 did not, and that was really at the end there, fighting off against 3 enemy tanks at once. Like the IS-3A, yes, it has some armour, much like the IS-3, but when you've got a T-34 and an Su-101 and a Somua shooting you, the frontal hull isn't really going to hold out for very long. Still managed to bounce 640 damage with his armour. 11 enemy vehicles damaged, that's over 2/3 of the enemy team, and of course 4 kills, 556 assistance damage, which was some tracking damage from what I remember in there. Remembering, of course, the IS-3A is a premium tank, so you would expect it to make pretty good credits, and it does, but because Active had to fire so many shots, he had to go into his reserve of heat ammunition, and so he ended up spending 65,500 credits on ammunition. So, even with I think that's a standard account he's running. Difficult to tell. No, it must be a premium account that he's running. Either way, even with that, 38,159 credit profit. Still a profit, but just not as spectacular as you might have expected from a 6,000 damage game in a premium tank. But them's the breaks. Commiserations to Active there, that was a painful result. And I tell you what, let's just try and wash your mouth out, because something like that will leave a bad taste. Hopefully, the second game I've got to show you today is not going to go in the same direction as the first. Here we go then with the second game, and we are joining Pansy here, and that's a sentence you're probably going to have to get used to hearing over the next couple of weeks, because in terms of replays that I've been sent, I've now caught up with the point at which I went on a bit of a hiatus from the game and from making YouTube videos. And most people took that as a sign to not bother sending me replays at that particular time, but Pansy isn't most people, so I still have a slug of replays, predominantly courtesy of Pansy, to get through before we actually start getting up to date and looking at least patch 1.10 games. That's not a complaint, but it does mean you're going to have the joys of watching Pansy drive around quite a bit. But to be fair, games with panties do tend to be quite interesting. Let's go with interesting. Now, straight off here, we are in the Leopard prototype, and this is on Mines, and it is a tier 9 maximum match. This is, well, I was going to say 357 matchmaking, but it's not 357 matchmaking. It's what, 4, 5, 6. Now, the Leopard prototype here has undergone some changes, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to showcase this game. the Leopard line got a little bit of a revamp, and so the Leopard prototype these days has the same gun as the Leopard 1, which was always the case anyway. But instead of this 105mm gun essentially being a carbon copy of the Royal Ordnance L7A1 used on the British medium tank line at higher tiers, this thing now has been given a little bit of love. So it is packing with standard ammunition. If I as APCR as standard, you are getting 278 penetration and 420 alpha damage on a tier 9 medium tank. I haven't done an exact comparison, but I would be surprised if there were a gun used on another tier 9 medium tank that compares with this gun right here. If you are willing to fire some premium ammunition, which is APCR as well, there's no heat ammo on this in this gun, then your penetration goes up to 323, and for your high explosive rounds, 510 alpha damage and 105 penetration. So there we go. Actually, 510 alpha for HE rounds when the AP does 420. That's not actually very good. Anyway, on with the game. We're here on Mines, which, if you ask many people, myself included, is a map that you just shouldn't get at the higher tiers, because the thing with Mines is that it's not the biggest map in the world. And you have this central hill which dominates the whole area. It's even worse on Encounter, because your capture circle is right underneath the hill and you can just shoot into it if you've got the hill. But anyway, so you've got this kind of small map, and in higher tiers everybody just spots everything. And then you get this awkward stage where the tank destroyers are just up on their respective camping locations, and it just ends up being painful. Anyway, while I've been wittering on, Pansy, ooh, that was a nice high damage roll. Then again, I have to remember 420 average damage, so 453. Yes, it's a high damage roll, but not as high as it might first think if you're thinking it's a 390 alpha gun. Anyway, while I've been wittering on, Pansy has racked up 3,000 damage already, 393 assistance. And the scoreline is 5-2 in his team's favour. No, this is not going to be a ruffle stomp, just to point that out. This game is gonna go on for a little bit. Anyway, let's have a look at what Pansy is dealing with here. Now, the Leopard prototype, yes, it's got a nice shiny gun now, very nice gun, and it's mobile, it's quick, but the one thing the Leopard prototype has always lacked is armour. The armour on this thing is terrible. You can't expect to bounce anything. I mean, you'll get the occasional lucky bounce, especially off the front of the turret, but you can't expect to be bouncing anything. Now, Pansy finds himself in this slightly awkward position. He's got a Type 61 below him. That's another tank that's had the gun revisited as they reworked the higher tier Japanese medium tanks. So these days, I believe the Type 61's 105mm gun gets lower alpha damage at 360, but a fairly impressive rate of fire. Anyway, but the problem is if Pansy goes to engage that Type 61, there's no guarantee that he's safe from the Progetto up on the hill. In fact, in all likelihood, he's not safe from the Progetto. And the Type 61 is actually packing quite a lot of hit points anyway, and I'm pretty sure the Type 61 will have the DPM advantage, so yeah. A little bit unlucky there from Pansy, a low damage roll from him, only hitting for 375. Low damage roll from the Type as well, although in this particular case, the Type, of course, having lower alpha damage is a bit less noticeable, but as it is, the Type 61 dies to friendly artillery. Thank you, Mr. GW Panther. Anyway, and Pansy now finds himself on 3.8k damage, which is a pretty good result, however you deem to look at it. We've still got a Progetto somewhere in the background over here, and there's a Borsig behind Pansy who could give some support. Now, I say we've still got Progetto in the background here. He was last spotted back there, but he hasn't reared his head in quite a while, and if I were Pansy, I would be thinking of relocating one way or another. Because I would have thought if that Progetto was still skulking around, then either someone would have spotted him, or he'd have shot us in the face by now, because poked a couple of times here. And Pansy decides to move up. I don't think that's necessarily a terrible play. Although you do have to be careful moving along the 1 and 2 lines here on mines, because once you're past about this point, suddenly you're in camping TD's going to wreck your face territory. And we know there's a Borsig up there, there's an Object 263, there's an Udes. I mean, that's just a whole world of fun that you just don't want a part of. But it does look like that Progetto has decided discretion is the better part of valour. And if you take a look at the scoreline on this game, you'll notice that the friendly team's modest lead has been eroded, and actually there is now an even more modest lead for the enemies, at least in terms of tank numbers. Now, Pansy decides to do something that was crossing my mind, I must confess, a little while ago, and I mentioned relocating. He's just deciding, screw this flank, I'm going somewhere else. Because again, the problem with pushing the 1 and 2 lines is, even if you win it, let's say you take out everything on it, you've then got to deal with those tank destroyers at the back, which can be problematic. Now, there might be a bit of an opportunity here, because it looks like nobody has decided to take the hill. Now, that could be a little bit of a false opportunity, so to speak, because it wouldn't take too much for someone, let's say the T-71DA, to go and spot you on the hill, and then suddenly you're back to tank destroyers giving you a full facial territory. And actually, speaking of the T-71, there he is. And there's the Progetto that we were pondering the presence of earlier on. Oh, low damage roll. 403 is a low damage roll, but that left a mark. And the Object 263, credit where credit has due, has decided that camping is not the order of the day. So Pansy has decided to take a more passive position than you might otherwise be tempted to if you were going for the hill, and as it turns out, I think that was definitely the right decision. Had Pansy gone up toward that hill, he suddenly would have been dealing with a T-71DA and a Progetto 46 at essentially the same time, and the only thing that's more fun than dealing with one autoloader is dealing with two. Oh, yes, the Progetto's an auto-reloader, blah 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 blah. You're dealing with two autoloaders, that would be a pain in the neck, and would probably result in Pansy's health disappearing faster than you could say shish kebab. So, the scoreline has now been levelled up. It's 11 kills apiece. Progetto has taken the hill. Udes and Borsig are almost certainly still back camping by the enemy base. Object 263 was last spotted over on the sort of, it's not an island, but the 1 and 2 lines over here at D1. On the friendly team, we've got Pansy here, who's on around about half health. The IS-3 is a one-shot for anyone who dares to sneeze in his general direction. We've got artillery, of course, the GW Panther, who's already shown his worth by helping Panties out earlier on. And we've got a friendly Oh-Ho. We don't know the hit points of that guy. We can't make that out from here, but I was about to say he's probably potentially going to be quite useful. He's got 3 kills, but he decided to press the W key in his Oh-Ho when there were a bunch of camping tank destroyers with predictable results. Object 263 there tries his luck, and Pansy's like, not today, sunshine. And the Progetto shuts down the IS-3. So suddenly it's Pansy and this GW Panther versus the Progetto, Rheinmetall and Udes. Now, the Progetto is a one-shot, which is good. Pansy had actually preloaded here a premium APCR shell, I suspect to try and make sure he could deal with that Object 263. But in the end, the guy, he had flanking shots on the guy. Oh, lovely shot there, and he died to Pansy's flanking shot. And so that round ends up taking out the Progetto instead, and Pansy switches back to armor piercing. So, Rheinmetall, Borsig and Udes. How does Pansy want to play this? We've got about 4.5 minutes left. One option would be to go and take the hill in the middle of the map, spot out the bad guys. Ooh. That's interesting information. I'll come back to that in a second. Spot out the bad guys, the tank destroyers, and try and murder them. However, you'll see Pansy, by the way, is asking in chat what gun the Borsig has. For anyone who doesn't know, the Borsig has a 12.8cm gun, which hits for 490 but has higher penetration and better accuracy, and a 15cm gun which hits for 750 alpha but has lower penetration and worse accuracy, so it's worth knowing what gun the guy is using. It looked like someone just landed a shell in Pansy's vicinity. Now, if that's the case, then that suggests at least one of those tank destroyers has moved up, and if one of those tank destroyers has moved up, my money would be on the Udes. Borsigs are quite slow and made of utter tissue. I mean, neither of these tank destroyers have much in the way of armour, and neither are the nippiest things in the world, but if someone's moving, I would say it's going to be the Udes. There we go. Udes puts one shot into Pansy there, and he just bugs out behind the buildings. But can Pansy loop a shot through some of these windows? I did not know some of these shots were available. We're all learning something here. Well, I'm learning something here. Maybe you lot already knew you could do half of this. Pansy takes a blind shot there. This is slightly awkward. Udes has 390 alpha damage, so whilst it's unlikely that he would finish Pansy off with that last shell, or with his next shell, 428 wouldn't be that high a damage roll to make it work. You're probably looking at maybe a 30 to 40, I'd say around a 30% chance, maybe, of 40 would be a bit high, I think, but 30% chance maybe of that shell rolling high enough on its damage roll to take Pansy out. Now Pansy actually switches to a HE round here, which I think is quite sensible. Hello, Mr. Borsig. These tank destroyers are being more aggressive than I was expecting. Jolly good. The Borsig has tissue paper for armor, and so is very susceptible to high explosive rounds, and the Udes is on such low health that a HE round should do the job. Pansy now switches back to an AP round, or armor piercing composite rigid, you get the point, as that should be able to deal with this Borsig, and it does. Very nicely done there. And there was always the chance that a HE round there could splash over the tracks. Now, I'm going to pick on what I think is the one mistake Pansy makes. As he kills the Udes, it didn't matter, but right at the end there, I will make one critique. That Udes was on about 30-something hit points. I think Pansy would have been better off loading a high explosive round there. Because even if he'd got unlucky and the AP round had bounced, if it were a HE round, it would have exploded on the Udes, and that thing has such terrible armour, should have taken the guy out regardless. But with that one exception, I struggle to pick too much fault with the rest of that game there from Pansy. Let's have a look at the post-game stats. So, as anyone who's watched this channel for any period of time would come to expect, a very high quality of game there from Pansy. That was enough, again unsurprisingly, for an ace tanker for the Leopard prototype there, plus Hand of God, not an award you expect to see too often in such a lightly armoured machine, Bruiser, Duelist, Fire for Effect, High Caliber, Tank Sniper, and a Top Gun for his 6 kills, which at tier 9 is a very nice result to have. 6,550 damage done, 6 kills, 1,472 base experience. If we have a quick look at both teams, again it becomes apparent why it is that Pansy's team ended up winning. Across the board, the two teams were roughly comparable, except the enemy Borsig was kind of carrying his team, certainly in terms of damage. 4,000 damage on his part, and Pansy was just able to carry harder. 6,500 damage from him. And on that note, shout out to the Borsig Eco Eve, 4,131 damage from him. And at the end there, where many less good, let's just go with it, Tank Destroyer players might have been tempted to camp hard. To give them credit where credit is due, the Udes and the Borsig both decided to come and fight it out. If I were to critique them, however, for it, it would be that they did split up, which made them easier for Pansy to take down. But I don't want that to take anything away from Pansy's game there. He played it very, very well. 21 shots fired, 18 hits, 18 penetrations. Bearing in mind, Pansy took a couple of blind shots there. Leopard's gun really singing in that game, and that looks like a very, very tasty gun. I've got the Leopard prototype myself. I haven't taken it out since the changes to that tank. I'm very much looking forward to that. Most of the damage Pansy did was from relatively close range. Mines is a fairly small map. That shouldn't come as a huge surprise. 5 hits received, 4 penned, 1 didn't. but that was eaten by his tracks. That wasn't his armour. I believe that was the Type 61 there that took Pansy's track off. 4 enemy vehicles spotted. 8 damaged, 6 destroyed, 800 assistance damage, 4.27 kilometers travelled, and with a premium account, that was a 43,500 credit profit. And apparently there was some sort of mission going on at the time, so Pansy actually made a metric boatload of experience, which is very, very nice. So there we go. There are my 2 replays for you today. I hope you ladies and gentlemen enjoyed them. Like I said before, if you wish to throw replays in my general direction, you're going to want to jump on the Discord server. Don't know what you call it. Jump on Discord. Link should be in the video description. Please poke me if I haven't put that link there, and you should be able to find the relevant thread on there. It's called Replay Submissions, I believe. And make sure it's a link on whatreplays.com, because that just simplifies my life considerably if you want to make a submission. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you're having fun at home, and as ever, I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.